Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and now on to our second year-end list, the one I always find the most fun, the top 10 best hit songs of 2018. So here's where things get kind of hard. I've already said in my last list that 2018 was a pretty bad year for the Hot 100, but was it? Really? When I started putting together this list, I actually found a pretty sizable list of pretty good songs where I actually had to make some cuts. But no, my choice of words there. There were plenty of good songs, but very few great ones, especially if we're going to make any comparisons to previous years. And that makes the flagrant awfulness stand out all the more starkly. But to explain why that is, well, the bad songs, they were execrable results of gross trends and chart manipulation, but I honestly couldn't get too mad at the latter because, hell, if the songs were good, nobody would be complaining that the chart was getting manipulated. Sadly, this is where the second part of the album bomb conversation comes up, as it started last time, and how they can prove surprisingly detrimental to more than just the album itself. Sure, it might give certain promoters a clue on how to push certain songs to become sleeper hits, but it can also burn people out on potential singles a lot faster and limits their chance to rise up within the top 10 or last within the Hot 100. You only need to look at how Post Malone mismanaged Candy Paint for an example of that. And while the radio will occasionally get on board with late album singles, in order to maintain relevance, they wind up pushing the most stale and broadly sketched music imaginable to satiate as wide of an audience as possible, which doesn't always align with quality. But what's perhaps most damaging about an album bomb is the aftershocks around it, where potentially weird or obscure songs riding up a slow groundswell just might get knocked aside, especially if you're not a megastar or you're in a subgenre that doesn't get much mainstream attention anyway. Now, the one thing I could say about 2017 hits is that they brought in an uncommon wealth of talent and critical acclaim to bear when they could wind up on both my lists for the best hits of the year and songs proper. 2018, not even close, especially when you consider how many artists disappointed or outright fell off this year, and it was a massacre. And yet, by some miracle, I got a list of songs which debuted on this year-end Hot 100 in 2018 that I can credibly call the strongest of this year, even if they don't really hold a candle to the best of, say, the majority of this decade. So let's start off with our honorable mentions, shall we?
Take a shot, make a friend, just enjoy the moment. Blue sky walking on these haters. Celebrate every day like a birthday.
Okay, you don't have to tell me that Miguel has made better songs. If Pineapple Skies had been released as a single, it'd probably have a spot on this list proper. It's just such a blissful song. But him not trying with Travis Scott against the low bass simmer, the gentle splashes of guitar, and the warping percussion, it was enjoyable enough to not just spot here. It's a fun track. And what I think I genuinely admire about Miguel is that in the era of desaturated and overmixed trap, that he can actually take some of those same tones and actually sounds like he's having fun with it, dropping in the sort of goofy pop culture references that are just silly enough to be kind of endearing. He's always had an air of effortless cool and a lot of low-key charisma, and while Travis Scott can't quite pull away from the darker implications, Skywalker rides his listless party into the sunset with a ride charm that maybe old man Luke in The Last Jedi kind of might have appreciated. That's still a good movie, by the way.
I'll be running through the jungle, I'll be crying with the wolves to get to you, to get to you, to get to you.
I think a running theme of many of these honorable mentions will be pointing to other songs that did these formulas better. And with Wolves, it is blatant. Because no, this isn't remotely in the same ballpark of a song like It Ain't Me that paired Selena Gomez with Kygo. And yeah, you can blame Marshmello for all of that with his flat, wiry trap drop touching off the guitar melody that manages to feel seedier with every single listen. But that being said, there is something kind of sleek, elegant, and strangely magnetic amidst the darker tones of the song. Throughout the past couple of years, Selena Gomez has found her lane as a pop artist who is just elastic enough to complement a lot of electronic music without losing a lot of her personality. Mostly because she doesn't have much to lose, but hey, she makes it work for her in more of a Britney Spears or Kylie Minogue sort of way, and this is a fine enough song. I'll take it.
It's just that simple, S-I-M-P-L-E, simple as can be. It's just that simple, S-I-M-P-L-E, simple as can be.
Sorry, buddy.
Okay, look, it's a combination of Home by Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros and any number of rollicking Mumford & Sons tracks that are light years ahead of the lifeless crap that they're making now. So let me just have this, please. I will say that despite Florida Georgia Line's absolutely hysterical campaign to convince people that they are indeed legitimate country artists, when they're just making dumb enough songs celebrating the simple life, they actually tend to stick the landing for me. First with Dirt back in 2014, and now this. And while this doesn't come close to forgiving Meant to Be, it is proof that this duo can pull something likable out every once in a while, even if it is kind of just dumb as sand and derivative.
It ain't safe, it ain't safe, it ain't safe, it ain't safe. Tell your man pipe up, nigga pipe up. And advance from the safe in your face where you say, money dance, turn the shit into a nightclub.
Yeah, amazingly, G-Eazy is going to be someone who makes both my lists before. But let's be brutally honest, nobody's coming to No Limit for anything that G-Eazy has to say. And I reckon that majority of the listeners, they just simply tune out before his thoroughly embarrassing third verse. Now, the reason I like this is A$AP Rocky commanding an ominous hook against the stormy trap groove, and then Cardi B shows up to steal the entire damn song. Honestly, that might have been the moment that truly won me over on her late last year as a solid MC in her own right, with a really bouncy flow, creative punchlines, and more charisma than anybody else has here. But you know what? Speaking of Cardi... Yeah, here's the plugged in comparison to a better song, because if this was Private Show by Little Mix, the conversation would be very different and likely the song would be on the list proper. Unfortunately, Psycho didn't bother to release that as a single, which meant that Bruno Mars has just enough room to squeeze his late album New Jack Swing song onto the hit parade. Now, it actually helps that it's really good and actually uses Cardi B effectively, placing her on a defiantly old school cadence, which was the blast of charisma to really kick this song into gear. If anything, she's what elevates this song into quality to get on this list, because otherwise... Alright, look, I like you, Bruno, but outright acknowledging that your flex makes no sense, that's a joke that's kind of run its course, especially coming from you of all people. It's also not the only song this year on this list that knew it barely made any sense and yet was just going to find it a good enough vibe and stick with it, kind of roll with it. How very 2009 of them, but we'll get to the other one. Okay, yeah, it grew on me. Almost to the point of making my list proper, to be honest. Most because of a solid groove and just enough lyrical darkness to back up some of the curdled frustration of the writing. But whenever I tried to elevate it to being as anthemic or punchy as I wanted, all the other problems I had with it months ago came back in. The percussion layering is terrible, the guitars have no real smolder, and for as much as 5 Seconds of Summer wanted to make an anthem of hot-blooded teenage anger, it kinda loses a lot of luster if the song never actually takes off or hits a real climax. Granted, it is by volumes one of the better songs on that last album, and just good enough to make this list, but I stand by what I said in that review. 5 Seconds of Summer should really go back to being a pop-punk band, because they were a lot better at that than this.
This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now.
So of all the cuts I made for my list proper, this is the one that is bound to be the most controversial. But for all the critical acclaim, I just kept finding elements that I didn't really like about this, or I would have to qualify to put it on this list. For one, this would have to be the first time in the history of this show that I'd have to say the only version of this song worth hearing is the video. Because if you lose those gunshots, this song loses so much power. But even more than that, the song really becomes a mechanism for subtext that you only really get in the video. And I've never given any artist credit for videos that elevate far less interesting songs. Otherwise, Sicko Mode might have actually had a shot for this list. Now, granted, the sharp juxtaposition of the acoustic passages with the darker, bassy trap groove, it still conveys enough of the point, especially with that eerie outro and Childish Gambino's raw charisma that permeates the song. It is a message of artistic intent and bravado I have to respect, but then you get the Kodak Black shoutout, and you realize that for as layered as Childish Gambino can be, he and the rest of hip-hop culture, they still have their blind spots. Still, a little bit scattered, but definitely good enough to get this slot. Definitely worth a revisit. Check it out. Okay, now into the list proper. Number 10. So I need to give credit to my friend and fellow critic, the Radical Douche, for turning me onto this song. Go check out his channel. He's certainly a character, definitely worth watching. But you know what? I think he's right. The truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off.
Hey, bad bitches wanna be my babe. Hey, hunt me down like the CIA. Hey, side of my car trying to see my face. Hey, want me to beat it like the TIKs. Oh.
It is utterly insane to me that this was the year of all years that NERD had their biggest hit. They are 5 albums in, 2 members being fixtures of the hip-hop community for decades, and the comeback that almost seemed like a late-year lark, dropped in mid-December of last year when I can't imagine anybody at the label thought people would care about it. And compared to when they broke around 2001, this album did not really move a lot of units, but it got them this single. And it's absolutely nuts. Make no mistake, like most of Pharrell's production work in 2018, it feels a little bit overworked and not particularly concerned with making any sense, with the rubbery tones careening against the more up-tempo trap vibe, which along with Metro Boomin might be the best way to make trap work in more of a pop context like this. But more than ever, this is a song that is dependent upon Rihanna to really work. Which for me is kind of weird, because there's evidence that this song was being worked on as early as 2015, a year where I put "Bitch Better Have My Money" on my worst hits of that year. But really, that song's existence kind of illustrates my point in how Rihanna can work in a hip-hop context. That song that was relying on oversold bad girl posturing that frankly seemed like she was trying way too hard to cultivate the vibe she wanted. So something that Lemon, you actually understands how to best use her. The less Rihanna tries as she bends across southern flows, she's got the sort of effortless cool that shows her evolve with every rap verse and shows some real swagger. So yeah, it's a pretty great song. I'm not sure any attempts at grit or flexing are entirely convincing in the lyrics, but when is this fun? Who the hell cares? Check it out. Number 9. So can Pharrell just keep making trap beats? I think this approach is working for him.
In the kitchen, wrist twisted like it's stir fry. Whip it in the kitchen, wrist twisted like it's stir fry. Whip it in the kitchen, wrist twisted like it's stir fry. Whip it in the kitchen, wrist twisted like it's stir fry.
So Migos spent 2018 really frustrating me, either as solo members or as a group, because they seemed to spend 2017 getting so much better and then they hit a sharp ceiling in 2018, the impact of which might have made some of them actually worse. Now, part of the feeling is that Migos just don't seem to get their strengths. I've never been impressed by a lot of their songwriting or wordplay, but give them a good enough groove and hope to God they can smuggle enough good lines to offset the bad, no pun intended, and you know what? You can get a really great song. And Stir Fry is a great song. Yeah, Offset's got that boogers line and the entire song is full of fast food references, but unlike, say, Carry Out from 2010, Migos doesn't center the entire song around it. That would require focus that they really do not have. But this showcases all 3 of them in their flexing comfort zone, and it finally gives Quavo a hook with some momentum and a good melody for once. But really, the star is Pharrell here. It's not quite production as mesmerizing as The Light Is Coming, the Ariana Grande song that would have been a hit if Nicki Minaj hadn't been ruining everything she touched this summer. But you know what? The song's got the same humid density and focus on melody that makes me come back to Pharrell time and time again, especially given the weird tropical vibe this song has. It was a summer hit, or at least deserved to be. Nothing Migos has ever made has a sound like this. They should change that. I want to hear more like this. Number 8. Okay, so I've seen the argument that pop has just been eradicated by trap over the past couple of years, but that's not really true. It's less relevant, sure, but even in eras where pop has been forced to the sidelines, there have been pop stars, often by holding on to ride enough good trends and not humiliate themselves. What's often more telling is the pop stars who skate under the radar and survive on the radio in this era. They often get swept to the side when pop music blows up again from artists who just have more charisma and personality and who assert themselves more. But as somebody who was on board with this artist early, yeah, she's sticking around.
You ain't getting over him. I got no rules, I count 'em. I got no rules, I count 'em.
In an era where so many pop artists have tried to emulate Lord's husky timbre or have just imploded, I think there is an argument to supporting pop that is sharply written, contemporary, and yet willing to find its own path and be its own thing. And as much as it would be very easy to pigeonhole Dua Lipa as more of a dance electronic act who is just filling time in mainstream pop, it doesn't give her nearly the credit she deserves for having a great voice and a ton of charisma. I've said before that she reminds me a lot of Pink in her alto, which Dua Lipa recognized given that she started her career career making covers of Pink songs on YouTube in her teenage years, but Dua Lipa's got a sense of effortless cool that balances out incredibly well against that raw anger coursing beneath her best songs. It's one reason why, while I like One Kiss with Calvin Harris, New Rules was the hit that grabbed me initially. It's a breakup lesson that knows how to escalate. The older sister of mainstream pop's little girls who can tell you not to do stupid shit like her or like Take Him Back because she's lived it. And the great thing is that if you know Dua Lipa, you know it's a mid-tier song on that self-titled debut album. And yet it's also the sort of track that I imagine Cardi B just plays on loop right now. Can't blame her. Great song. Number 7. Do you remember when this song came out and for like a few weeks there was this rush of hope that you could admit with a straight face that you liked Drake again? Can we go back to that? Please?
That's a real one in your reflection. Without a follow, without a mention. You really piping up on these niggas. You gotta be nice for what to these niggas? I understand.
So in a year where God's Plan was dominant on the Hot 100, Nice for What deserved to be so much bigger than it was. And it went to number 1. It should have just been there longer. I love how Murder Beats flipped the Lauryn Hill sample and then Drake hopping on a Louisiana bounce song. A sound that I really wish he hadn't tossed to the side so quickly for desaturated nonsense on Scorpion. And honestly, it's hard for me not to consider Big Frida as more of the song than Drake is. She sets the tone early, and given how the song is gonna just chop Drake's final verse into slivers, she's easily the more dominant voice in setting the tone. And I like how much Drake just will take himself out of this song. It's the right choice. For once, it's not all about him. And the more he plays as someone who's just admiring and understanding from the sidelines, it's a better look. It fits his natural timbre. Now you can absolutely make the argument that it's pandering, because it is, but there's something to kind of admire about Drake giving his most devoted audience the sort of anthem that they can spit in his face for really the rest of his career. Also, this is important, it's a fun song. Remember fun? I like to think we're all not too good for fun, right? Because if we're looking for Drake songs that we want to stick around throughout the end of this decade, yeah, how about this one? Number 6. So there are a lot of critics I otherwise respect who hate this song and this artist, and I haven't quite been able to pin down why. Most because there's this allergic reaction that is just get this away from me that they put forward rather than any sort of coherent statement. I think there's an anger that he's most notable for blowing up off of a Snapchat meme. I mean, who even uses Snapchat anymore, right? I never used to begin with, so I don't know. And look, I'm not gonna say there's a lot to it, but let me make my case.
On your body, I don't wanna waste no time.
Look, I reviewed Bazzi's debut album Cosmic this year. Most of my peers didn't, and I think that might be the problem, because the album does a fine enough job explaining his appeal, in that he's a bit of a throwback. As R&B goes, he's a serious lightweight, especially lyrically, but if anything, that kind of adds the young love, starry-eyed moment of romance that gives the song its sparkle. And that's the point. It's direct, it's completely sincere, and it's just kind of ramshackle enough in its groove and percussion to make the glittery starburst on the hook really click for me and have some power. Honestly, and follow me on this comparison, it's got a similar emotional appeal to a lot of XXXTentacion's work, in principle if not execution. That you can make this song like this, I could make it, with enough amateurish bite to add that homegrown appeal, but enough raw talent to make it actually stick the landing. Now granted, I don't think Bazzi will stick around. His remix of Beautiful with Camila Cabello is the expected second move, but also the complete wrong one when he's got Mirror on the album instead. But yeah, this is genuinely sweet, and in 2018, I'm not so jaded to dismiss it. You shouldn't be either. Check it out. Number 5. And on the other side of that conversation, when you're given all the money and all the fame in the world, and yet you still manage to tank it, well...
They sing for the best. My reputation's never been worse, so you must like me for me.
Look, I think at this point, even some of Taylor Swift fans have realized that Reputation was a failure. An ambitious one to be sure, but singles they either tanked or they were critically savaged. And while even in my review off the album, I tried to advise people just give the album room to breathe, a year later it's not held up. And what's genuinely frustrating is that Taylor Swift could have actually seen some success if she had pivoted away from her awful early moves and done it earlier and fast. But that would require agility, and there's no way that her promotional monstrosity has that ability to just turn on a dime. And yet, I think it's very telling that her best single from this era was her most low-key, mostly auto-tune slice of closed-off insecurity that works for the same reason the auto-tune worked on 808s and Heartbreak. There's restraint, the bottled-up emotion, and yet finding some quiet pathos that might actually be real in that connection. I love the understated groove. I love that Taylor Swift bottoms out convincingly here, even if it is just her reputation. I like the humanity revealed in her second guessing. I like that there's a flicker of being genuinely love-struck again, despite everything that she's gone through. Now, the proper follow-up move would be to release Getaway Car as the next single for a proper correction, and while it did actually get pushed in Australia of all places, it actually got some fairly decent numbers. Given that Taylor Swift has changed labels, I can see her just writing this era off and just moving on. I mean, she kind of salvaged things at the end, probably for the best, and you know what? I got hope that Taylor Swift will come back strong. At least off this. Number 4. I really wish Ariana Grande's best songs did better. And make no mistake, this has happened with nearly every album she's pushed thus far. Yes, Love Me Harder was a hit, but not the same way Problem was, or Bang Bang. Yes, Into You was a hit, but not like Side to Side. And now Thank You Next has gone to number 1, and I don't see what can credibly beat it in the next month or so. But wouldn't it have been nicer if this had gone to number 1 instead? Maybe?
Ain't got no tears left to cry, so I'm picking it up, I'm loving, I'm living, I'm picking it up, I'm picking it up, I'm loving, I'm living, I'm picking it up.
So I'll admit it took a while for No Tears Left to Cry to really grow on me. Mostly because in the annals of the great Ariana Grande songs, I would not quite put this among my favorites. Yeah, it's airy, and she's finally learned that her cooing upper register is far more compelling than her belting, and the build-up throughout that hook is impressive as the song progresses, but I keep expecting there to be a bit more of a payoff than there actually is. Granted, for this sort of effervescent, above-it-all kiss-off, it is amazingly effective, but it's hard to avoid the feeling that Ariana Grande just still played a little safe with it, and indeed with most of Sweetener, which is an album that I like, even despite how often it flies down weird tangents that don't quite stick the landing. Hell, if you're making a comparison to songs like God is a Woman and The Light is Coming, this is arguably one of the most straightforward singles to chart from that album, and that's honestly might be the key of why it works so well. There's a sense of refined scope and yet big scale that might not swing for the fences in the same way in terms of experimentation, but does better because she knows her limits now, and she can still make the sound so huge and sweeping. I mean, I got quibbles with some of the writing. For her to want to be in that state of mind, as she describes, like all the time, still has some of that immature Valley Girl vapidity that increasingly bothers me about Ariana, especially on Thank You Next. But hey, this grew on me in the right way, and I hope her continued development doesn't wind up getting arrested because of songs like Thank You Next. Great song though. Check this out. Number 3. So I did not expect this song to make Billboard's year-end list, especially if you're just going off the point totals built off of chart placement alone. I mean, this never broke the top 40. It was the follow-up that did well, sure, but never quite seemed big enough to make that year-end list. And yet, since Billboard calculates their year-end numbers based off of a cumulative total for that song's performance, somewhat independent of how a song actually places on the charts, well, we got it.
You say I'm sorry, but it's too late now. So save it, get gone, shut up.
So there are some songs on this list where the appeal might require a bit of explanation, but for I Don't Give a Fuck, it's a pretty simple one for me. It sounds like a really great Pink pop song. Now, Pink's best stuff has always been on her rock side, I think even her fans will admit that, and you do get a trace of that here thanks to the guitar backing up the verses, but Dua Lipa embodies what I've loved about Pink's energy for nearly 2 decades while still bringing her own distinctive spin. It's profane, but it knows where to use its profanity to drive a point. It's a kiss-off riding off of these huge snare drums, but knows how to manage its tension. It actually pulls a lot from Just Like Fire, but just does it a billion times better. And while you can tell that there was some sort of burn here from the past, Dua Lipa hits the balance of caring just enough beneath the lines to want to kick your ass, while convincingly not caring. It's performative, for sure, and the video is smart enough to reveal that in its very mirrored approach, but it's a performative power that carries weight because Dua Lipa can sell with just enough contemptuousness to work, and that is cemented by the piano-accented post-chorus, where enough of the exasperation just bleeds through against that thick low end to hit hard as hell. Yeah, folks, this is the Dua Lipa that I really liked from her self-titled debut, and I got some high hopes for where she can take things in 2019. I saw her live this year. She is a pop star, and I really want to see her get some major traction. Hopefully off songs like this. Number 2. I know there's going to be a lot of people who are surprised by my choice of this song, and for different reasons. I mean, if you only see my older work, where you might remember where I repeatedly called this guy one of the worst things to ever happen to bro country, and that his 2015 album was one of the worst of its kind, and yet in 2017, he made a comeback with a tolerable album. And while I will struggle to call much of it country, he had one song where I could not deny the genuine greatness. And he co-wrote it too. I couldn't just assign credit to Shane McAnally or the rest of the Nashville songwriting machine. It proved he had real talent. And believe me, it'd be so much easier to consign him to the dust heap of forgotten bro country acts. There was a bunch this year, but quality's quality. I can man up and I'll call it like I see it.
I'm trying to make it through without crying, so nobody sees. Yeah, she wanna get married, but she don't wanna marry me.
Marry Me is the sort of song that is so special because it both exceeds and defies expectations in every way. Yeah, it's a modern pop country song, so the percussion's a little clunkier than it should be, but there is a warm country twang playing off the guitar tones and the arranged elements that actually fits the mood of a wedding song in this lane. And for the most part, Thomas Rhett really underplays to fit that role. But that's just exceeding expectations because it's Thomas Rhett by nailing the dramatic contrast and a great build-up on the bridge. Where he defies expectations, it comes in the songwriting, and where he somehow throws 2 more curveballs in a row. The first punchline you get in the first hook. The wedding's established, you would expect Thomas Rhett to be the groom-to-be, and he's not. Yeah, he blew his chance. He could never make the move to get the girl. And suddenly you get the different feeling that with him going to this wedding, you're gonna get one of those confrontations at the altar playing in very cliched romantic comedies, and a very different sense of foreboding kicks in every time. And yet it doesn't happen. It builds to it, the bridge is hyping it up for that big swing, and yet in the first real show of maturity that Thomas Rhett has ever had in his songwriting, he swallows it back, wishes her good luck on the future. And what I love about the song is that it feels so real to me. Not only in how the sort of story that most country artists seem afraid to tell in today's modern age, but that there's no guaranteed gratification, and that can balance out showing some real vulnerability with common sense maturity that nails the gravitas. In other words, while so much of Thomas Rhett's former output played at adolescent immaturity coaxed through its nepotism, this song actually, when it comes to artistic maturity, it's when Thomas Rhett grew up, became a real man. And you know what, in 2018 with men, it's important to salute that. Good job, dude. I like this. And finally, number 1. And yet for those of you who follow me more closely, you're probably stunned that Marry Me is not my number 1. The majority of the year it was close. Like Love Me Harder back in 2015 is arguably the more composed, self-contained, and successful song in what it's trying to do. But as such, its scope could feel a little limited. A great microcosm in a moment, but if you look past that, it wasn't the song that had the emotional impetus to truly grip me in 2018. And just like when I talked about Cool for the Summer 3 years ago, the case I need to make is already cut out for me, so let me make it.
Everybody says say something, say something, say something, say something, say something, say something.
I'm not going to defend Man of the Woods by Justin Timberlake. The album as a whole, it's a mess. And while I was more mixed than outright negative on it, most because I am convinced that certain songs would be perceived very differently if it wasn't Justin Timberlake who was making them, it absolutely failed in that it didn't do what Justin Timberlake wanted it to do. And yet if there was a song that absolutely transcended the album, it was Say Something. And it was rightfully the biggest success that Justin Timberlake had this year, and the crossover that gave Chris Stapleton his first top 10 hit. And while I got the impression that some folks condemn Man of the Woods with so much venom because it was Justin Timberlake making it, the reason that Say Something works is because it carries itself with so much ego and presence, but it's a shocking moment of insecurity. And that insecurity and complicated question of action, it gives the song its power beyond that weird blubbery bass line, the choppy acoustic groove that's infectious as hell, the dense whirring percussion, and that huge hook that I can't help but sing along with. All of which sounds like nothing else this year, and it carries with so much distinctive atmosphere that it really promised a far better album than that. But you know what? Think about what I just said, because like it or not, we all had huge expectations of Justin Timberlake and of Chris Stapleton. Well, it's because the music press and the public kind of went overboard creating their music legends only to turn on them just as fast. And hell, I was there. There were quarters who wanted to give JT the throne of the king of pop, and I have read so many fawning articles painting Chris Stapleton as as the savior of country music, indie or otherwise. And then throughout the last 12 months, I saw so much of them just throwing them under the bus for daring to even approach that title. And that's before you throw in the political angle, which is relevant here, and neither artist is ever really addressed in their music, but by their presence in their genres, they're kind of expected to say something, especially in searching for something that they can't have, either old or new. In 2018, they kind of expect you to say something. Now note the language choices. Justin Timberlake's passions are pulling him in a direction that would shock people in his art, and Chris Stapleton notes that his transgressions working within the Nashville songwriting machine has faintly damned him in some eyes, so maybe it's best that they stay quiet and say nothing. But they can't help themselves. And this is where I had previously come down on this song, because sometimes we really didn't need to hear ill-conceived opinions from artists who don't have the greatest nuance to begin with, but that's not what this song on its own is really after. It's not trying to silence by its presence, and if it wants to actively avoid the cacophony on either side, and if they get caught up or they go askew, they're willing to take that step back. It is a choice to make music out of ego, like nearly every other artistic expression, but to take direction or be welcomed back into the right fold and big voices subtly pointed in the right direction, they've got a lot of power, and they can be. And for someone who too often found himself caught up in the middle of it, this hit home. And while I'm damn certain nobody else will agree with this, it's my top song of 2018. I have the feeling this song will be remembered long after Man of the Woods is long forgotten, probably for the best. And for a moment, that frustrated, curdled tension that best summarizes this year, I don't think you could pick a better song. And so yeah, Say Something, Justin Timberlake, Chris Stapleton. Yeah, it stuck. At least for me. But yeah, what was your favorites? I'm kind of curious, because I know this will probably surprise a lot of people. But hey, if you want to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. And the comments are there for y'all to tell me how wrong I am. Looking forward to it. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.